Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Romero Peter, and I am Counsel at CloudNine, and I'm also the Director of Strategic Sales. I am a practicing attorney, and I've had about 20-something years in eDiscovery. Brian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, this is Brian Kelley with CloudNine. I'm the Director of Product Strategy here at CloudNine. I've been with CloudNine for about 9 years. I've helped customers migrate from multiple different applications to CloudNine Review. I've helped customers who are in the concordance and law environments, move to CloudNine SaaS-based applications as well. So a lot of experience doing it across, different product suites, including our own. Jeff, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Brian. Jeff Dunning. I'm with Innovative Driven. I'm Director of Corporate Cloud Services, and we basically help customers with their unstructured data from creation through governance, through disposition, and kind of everything in between. Been in this space around unstructured data and governance for 20 plus years now. So kind of seen it all through the transitions.
Hey, greetings, everybody. My name is Don Anderson. I'm a client executive for Opti9 Technologies. We are a hybrid cloud provider based in Omaha, and we've got some facilities out on the East Coast as well. I've been with Opti9 for approximately 2 years, and in the prior decade, I had spent a good amount of time in business development, client executive-oriented roles in cybersecurity and DevOps firms.
So let's get started. So we're here to talk about moving to the cloud. So the most obvious question is, where do I start if I want to move to the cloud?
I'll jump in here first. And, this is the question that everyone's asking. And really, honestly, it's where people are making so many mistakes. And I think the big thing is it starts with proper planning and kind of having outcomes you can manage to, right? There's a lot of people that are just kind of doing the lift and shift, kind of take you from point A to point B, but doesn't really make anything better, right? You got to have a plan. You got to take the modern tools and kind of use them for, to make things better. Like you can declutter your garage all you want, but if you don't have a plan that says, let me get rid of some stuff, let's kind of make some new storage options, like let's do some things differently, you're really just, you're never going to have a decluttered garage. You just move it from the right corner to the left corner. You got to really, find a pain point that you can fix, even if it's small, right? Just solve a problem. And then that's going to get your customers, your end users to kind of believe in what you're doing and kind of let that, process kind of keep going. So attack it in small pieces, have a plan, find small wins, get some credit, get some kind of goodwill under your belt and kind of move on from there. But got to have a plan.
Let me follow up on that. Brian, what do you think, if you have like 100 cases, should you just start with the first case that's the active cases, or, do you need to really have everything there? I think at the end of the day, in my opinion, you don't really need everything up there.
Yeah, so what I see usually works best for our customers is usually starting with the cases that are either the most active, or if you have some internal champions within your organization that are going to help guide the rest of the organization in that direction, work with those people first, right? So if there are some paralegals or attorneys who are kind of managing those cases and they're really excited about the movement process, start with those cases, get them willing to take on maybe some challenges that you may experience, because they're the ones who are going to be most willing to kind of work through any problems or challenges that you experience. And as you come across those, they're going to help you identify those challenges so that the individuals within your organization that may not want to make the move or may have some concerns aren't the first ones to run into some of those problems. So it's not always just the most active or the most important case, but it's the case with the right individuals and the right cases for the movement that you should almost always focus on first.
So John, do you agree with that? Will that help with adoption?
I would completely agree with both thoughts and both comments. I would also add to that I think it's important at some point to engage a partner. And whether you're looking at AWS, Azure, GCP, these cloud computing organizations rely on the partner community to help you identify kind of your assets. They help you prepare for putting a strategy together. And I say that for really one of two core reasons. One, because the partner is going to have a good amount of experience. They've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of different environments. They can help a given organization avoid a lot of hurdles that some other people have been challenged with in the past. And two, the partner community, when it does come time to make moves and to start putting things into a cloud environment, will have access into really deep funding vehicles that are provided by the cloud computing partners. So those are really kind of the two of the top things in my mind that would be important, is to engage a partner to help you kind of navigate some of the early stages.
Great. So my next question is, what are the most common misconceptions about the transition to the cloud? Who wants to go first on that one? You want to kick us off?
I could kick us off for sure. So there's two things really that come to my mind. One, the thing I hear from time to time is that security, is it going to be a replication of my on-prem environment? We've invested heavily over a course of time into our perimeter defensive data security, whether that's in transit or at rest. Are we abandoning that investment? So for me, a properly configured public cloud environment built around zero trust principles are going to give any organization an immediate upgrade to a given security posture. Cloud providers, they operate on shared security models, which means you inherit some things that are really going to be useful regardless where you are or what your environment looks like. A shared security model in this case means you're going to inherit all of the physical environmental controls. So your infrastructure-based hardware, software, networking, certainly the facilities, and that core infrastructure is built to satisfy the CIA, the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of large global banks like the military, three-letter federal organizations. So you're going to be in good hands because that is kind of where they start with their security measures. I'll add to that, when I say a zero trust model, that centers on the idea that everything is really treated as hostile unless they're specifically authorized. And maybe a better way for me to put that is that it's based on a very, very strong identity and access management practice. Just extend that just a bit outside of security, coming into things like compliance. That also means that you inherit those comprehensive compliance controls that are based on the security standards. So the certifications that you would have immediate access to would be things like PCI, HIPAA, FedRAMP, certainly GDPR, NIST, ISO, and many others. You would really be able to satisfy compliance requirements right around the world.
I really agree with you on that, Don. And to Brian and Jeff, I think one of the things that I've noticed in law firms, and this kind of elaborate on that question, is that law firms are not in the business of data security. They practice law. And I often say that the law firm is probably the least secure place for data, in my opinion. And that can be proven by a lot of the cases where you're talking about the Panama paper, the Paradise papers, even the hacking with the Chinese and the trading thing that happened at a New York top firm. So I think sometimes the misconception is people think that the law firm is a safe place because you have attorney-client privilege and you have all these things. But in reality, they're in the business of practicing law, and most of them don't even have any of the certifications that you mentioned, Don. Is that correct, Brian and Jeff?
I mean, that's what we see a lot of times with our customers is, by making these transitions, they're typically going to have better compliance to those, ISO requirements or NIST requirements or any of the other ones that Don, talked about, simply because of the fact that there's teams of people looking at those problems and, making changes and keeping track of, the upgrades, the, security updates and things like that exist within those environments, which a lot of times we see our customers in some cases can be behind on because they don't want to take the site down to, make an update for some of those smaller security patches.
So it's so true. And it's, having those larger organizations doing all that stuff, like Brian and Don mentioned, it's hard for them to kind of keep up with just updates and the small things they need to do. And then you add the ability to get all those extra services. Don was talking about compliance and starting to be able to look at sensitive data and all that stuff that just comes along for the ride at that point because you're working with one of these cloud providers. I mean, the benefits there, are just huge. And like, you can't get all that work done internally. There's just, nobody has the staff to do that. We're struggling, just like Brian mentioned, just to do updates on a regular basis.
One of the big things out there, or perceptions, I'll say perceptions, because the perception is someone's reality, is that there's a lot of risk in moving to the cloud. How are those risks real, and how can you limit any risks that do exist when moving to the cloud? Want to start? Brian, you have to start off. How about you?
Yeah, sure. So, some of the biggest challenges there are just the risk of the unknown for a lot of organizations, right? What are they trying to do? What are they going to accomplish? What is it going to look like? What kind of downtime are they expecting? Who is it that they're going to have to involve in the process? What does that process look like? So, what we do here at Cloud9 is we typically go through kind of some checklist of processes, right? We look at what our clients are trying to accomplish. And we talked a little bit about this, or where do we start? What is the most important or priority information that you want to bring there first? What are the most important individuals within the organization that we want to focus on and getting them set up to start? But it also comes down to like, what are you actually trying to move? Jeff made a great point about the garage analogy, right? If you have a ton of junk and you just move all that junk to another place, it may be prettier, it may be nicer, and it may be a little bit better organized. But if you just dump it in the middle of the garage, it's the same problem, just in a different facility. So by identifying some of those early steps, doing some of that housekeeping, doing some of that spring cleaning of the data, making sure that you're prioritizing what is actually most important, and doing a little bit of cleanup. There's some benefits of that process just by identifying, reducing some risk of not moving data that you may no longer need to hold, or reducing, access controls to the person that you gave access to 6 years ago and is logged in one time in those 6 years. You actually, through this process, really do also start to clean up some of the, the holes in your process that have kind of fallen through as well.
That's a really good answer. I totally agree with you. Jeff and Don, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the other part of it is just really understanding the data, right? You really just need to understand who's been creating it, who's going to be the consumer of that, and a little bit around what it does contain. You want to understand kind of what's in that data. So the more you understand about the data that you have and that you're moving over there, the more you can limit that risk, right? You can clean up the stuff you don't want to. If there's some stuff you have to kind of hide or not bring over for whatever reason, you can do that. So really understanding the data and not just looking at it as a pile of data that I got to get someplace else, but really starting to understand a little bit about what you have inside there is going to allow you to limit some of that risk as well.
Yeah, and both thoughts are really well said. And I also appreciate the garage analogy, and Brian, you kind of gave another idea around, the ease that it could be to move into the cloud. It's the risk management that's hard. So both points I really think are well taken.
The next question we have is about, what are the biggest roadblocks? And I think the question, that you just answered is that perception and the idea that there's so much risk, right? And the garage or the hoarder, the data hoarder, right? Those are all like the biggest roadblocks, is really people's own minds that they think a server in someone's office is going to be less safe, right, than the big unknown cloud, which is not the reality. Is there any other roadblocks that you guys think are out there?
I think Brian, I think Brian said it well earlier. It's really the fear of the unknown. It's just not knowing. Not knowing are our costs going to go up? Like, we even look at that, right? It's going to be more costly to do all this stuff. So do our costs go up? Are the tools going to be harder to use? Like, am I going to have to wait days to get responses? Like, all those things that no one knows. Like, change is one of the hardest things to deal with. And that unknown around, especially around an area that has some time sensitivity to it and some, real level risk to it, not knowing what's happening there is kind of really one of those kind of roadblocks, is people don't want to go there. That's why, going back to the early conversation of finding a team that is willing to kind of get outside the box a little bit and work with you through the process is going to help that. And if you can get that first and second win, everybody kind of starts to get on board a little bit more. But it's truly the unknown.
Yeah, so you need almost like your champions within the organization as you're transitioning, which goes back to Brian's earlier point. So, Don, anything to add on roadblocks? Do you think any other roadblocks are out there? I'm sorry.
There's a few things that come to mind. I think certainly, and I come back to reasons why you might want to work with a partner. Somebody that's third party, that's objectionable. That's seen, again, hundreds of thousands of different environments, can help you with the macro and the micro aspects of moving into the cloud. The three things that I'm always talking about, or that I'm hearing quite a bit about, is people and culture. time for sure. How long is this going to take us? And then there's expense management that's going to come along with all of this as well. So, there's assessments that can be put together. Again, many of which can be funded by the cloud computing partner as a whole, but the outputs of such assessments would be along the lines of putting together a cloud center of excellence, right? When you move into the cloud, you're going to change culture. You're going to change the way people function and go about their daily business. So creating a cloud first mentality through a cloud center of excellence, a partner will help you put those things together and help guide you through that. But certainly training programs, once you do a move, you're going to have to be able to function and run that environment once it's there. So being preemptive and helping you understand, what types of training your current staff is going to need to be able to operate that environment. And from a time and expense standpoint, again, I think that those two things are very closely related. A partner can help you, go down the road of actually doing the migration. You don't want to become migration experts yourselves, because once you're migrated, well, what are you going to do? And then again, from an expense standpoint, again, I can't hit this part enough. These organizations, these cloud computing firms, they have very deep funding vehicles. If you tap into them the right way, it can really, really bring your expense management into a better place than what you might originally think maybe initially as a roadblock.
So, we talked about the roadblocks and touched upon the migration, and I think that, one of the roadblocks that you're all like going back to is that unknown, but also the fear of that the migration may take too long. So what are some approaches to that migration path that can streamline it? And you mentioned bringing in, partners. One of the things that I think helps in the migration, and that maybe it doesn't fit into the question so much, but is that by having a cloud first, like you said, approach, you're prepared to deal with any, business continuity. So it not only does it help you be more efficient and more secure, but also you're ready for the next pandemic or where people can't go into the office and work, and you can work remote. So I just thought we'd add that one, and I'm guessing you guys agree with me. For the migration path, and you'd already touched upon this a bit, Don, what are the steps or what are the things that people need to think about as they migrate? The best approach.
Yeah, so it's a good question when you talk about migration. I mean, your workloads and applications in a given environment are going to be so diverse. There's going to be so many different paths that one can take. As we talked prior about an assessment that can be put into your environment, first of all, you need to understand what sits there in your environment, and that's not only servers and applications. And you're getting into things like RAM storage, CPU, the interdependencies between the applications and the systems. So once you have those types of things, you can start building a strategy around what can be moved. What's a multi-year total cost of ownership analysis? And certainly that migration plan is going to include the types of things that ought to move first, and really in what sequential order. And maybe that's an order of complexity, but more often than not, when we identify what types of things should be moved into a cloud environment, the lift and shift optimizes be really kind of the fairly easy, first layer of things that are easy wins to move. But then you look at other things like whether you're going to rehost, you're going to re-platform, there's things you can repurchase, refactor, or you can just retire some things in your environment. So as we put those things together for a client, we want to really be sensitive to, the garage analogy that we had used earlier and how to get things in the proper place at the proper time.
Don, one thing that comes to mind when you were saying that is that a lot of people forget to also account for, and this is not just about the migration, but you touched upon the cost of other things as you migrate, right? And I think when I talk to clients, at least in my experience, and Brian, correct me, or add to this, because we have similar experiences, they forget to account for the cost, not just of hardware, but their people costs in managing those systems internally versus the cloud, right? Usually people get in trouble for having, not enough security. They don't usually get in trouble for choosing AWS or Azure or Google Cloud. It's kind of like the old IBM. No one gets fired for hiring IBM, right? No one gets fired for hiring those three or some of the other ones that are out there as well. So I just, that to add that to that kind of which I think helps also with the migration plan. But anyway, I digress. Brian, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I think that's a very valid point, right? There's additional, cost associated with, on-prem deployments of things. It is the people. In some cases, it's the downtime and the accessibility of the data. In a lot of organizations, having it on-prem means that it only can be accessed when they're in their VPN or within some type of, connected environment. And in situations in which you can't get to those connected environments, if you're at a client's office or something like that, you have some, cost associated with the inability to access data that the cloud does, really, mitigate. When we talk about migration, though, I've always found that when we work with our customers, and I come from a kind of product development environment, so we talk a lot about sprints, right? And sprints in product development is basically completing tasks within small chunks, digestible chunks. I'm sure everybody's also heard of the, how do you eat an elephant, right? It's one bite at a time. And so when you're doing those migrations, you really want to look at opportunities to make wins, because sometimes these migrations can take a long time. If you've been in an application for 10, 15 years, you're going to have a lot of data, and a lot of the data is going to be things that you really haven't worked with, and it's not going to be on the front burner of what you want to focus on. So by creating these smaller wins where you have accomplishable goals and you can show progress toward those, you're going to be more likely to continue with the migration and with the actual process. And it eliminates some of the challenges of, hey, we've kind of hit a point, we're really happy where we are, we'll get to that later, right? But if you really make it something that is a goal, something that you can check off, give yourself accolades when you accomplish those, you're going to be more willing to complete the entire process, and you're not going to get stuck supporting two systems, on-prem and a cloud-based application for, a longer period of time.
Yeah, I would just say, we, dealing with data a lot more. That's kind of what I've been doing for a long time is, that upfront information architecture, really understanding kind of what are the things you want to do with that content. We're going to govern it. Do we want to make sure we have disposition, maybe some form of records, whatever those cases are, really understand kind of what your charter is and what kind of a data steward you want to be, and then make sure that information architecture sticks so that when you're going through planning of each step of that migration, you're kind of trying to apply that architecture as much as you can. So there's consistency across the board. And that's going to help in all those things like findability later on, the ability to kind of tag data and kind of dispose of it, maybe manage it as a record. So that architecture is important to kind of have in place. And it just gives you that consistency going forward, so that everything kind of looks and feels and operates really similarly, and it gets that end user, right? One of the big goals always is like, let's make sure our customers, our end users are buying into this. They feel like this is actually helping them, and you didn't add to their already busy day, right? So like, how do we make their life easier? So having that up front and then applying that as consistently as possible really kind of helps that whole migration, especially when it comes to the data side.
Thank you so much, all three of you, for that great input. Now, if you had one thing to say to an organization that's feeling so overwhelmed by the idea of going to the cloud, what would that one thing be? Brian, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I would say the most important thing to do is, look at what, you have in front of you and identify the small wins, the small tasks that you can accomplish to actually get that process moving. Because as soon as you start kind of cleaning it up and, going back to our garage analogy we've abused in this conversation, it sometimes feels really good just to get that first thing moved, right? That first thing organized, that first thing, brought to where you need it to be. And by getting those small tasks, those small accomplishments, it's going to make the entire process seem a lot easier if you celebrate, each of those wins along the way.
Yeah, so that cloud first mentality, right? Modernize your processes around it as well. So make sure you're kind of changing the way you do things to match these new kind of cool tools you have, right? Make sure you're getting value from that move to the cloud and you're just not taking your problems with you.
Perfect. And Don?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, I think, again, going back to the garage analogy, just inventorying your assets, knowing exactly where they are, how much is sitting there. Brian, your idea of, or your statement around eating an elephant one bite at a time is really critical. Early wins, absolutely. There are tools that you can deploy in your environment that are very thinly deployed that will give you kind of all of that detail over the course of a couple of weeks of just observing in your environment that will tell you specifically what sits there. But that's the other thing that I find as well, is a number of organizations we work with, they have an idea, they have some thoughts on where their assets are, what is stored on those assets, et cetera. But I would really recommend being very specific and narrow on what those things are.
Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen. This has been so much fun to hear and pick your brains on how to move to the cloud. Hopefully this will help some of our audience to move to the cloud and join us there.